The cameras were rolling when 24-year-old Bryce Caldwell, the youngest son of a Scottsdale, Arizona real estate developer whose net worth was publicly listed at $34 million, leaned across the center podium at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta during the pre-game handshake and said to the family standing on the opposite side, "The Torres family from Laredo, Texas, whose patriarch Miguel Torres worked 2 jobs and whose oldest son had returned from 13 months deployed in Afghanistan 6 weeks earlier. No offense, but you really can't win against a family like mine. We've been training for this." The Torres family did not react. Miguel Torres, 54, put both hands in his pockets and looked straight ahead. His oldest son, Roberto, 26, who was standing at the end of the family row and who still winced at sudden loud noises, looked at Bryce Caldwell for 1 second and then looked back at the stage. Steve Harvey had been walking toward the center podium from the left side of the stage when he heard it. He stopped walking. He stood completely still for 4 full seconds. Then he walked the remaining 12 steps to the center podium with measured, deliberate step of a man who has already decided something and is simply arriving at the moment to say it. He said 15 words, quietly, without amplification adjustment, without gesture. And those 15 words became, within 72 hours of the episode's airing, the most shared clip of his entire 20-year television career. It was a Tuesday, November 5th, in Atlanta, Georgia. The Family Feud studio had the particular anticipatory energy it builds when the audience has settled into a taping that hasn't yet announced what kind of day it's going to be. The Caldwell family had arrived in coordinated navy blue polo shirts that had clearly been ordered and planned. Bryce Caldwell, designated as the family's spokesperson, was articulate, fast on his feet, and visibly accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room he entered. He had studied. He had researched. He had ranked the most common survey answers in 14 different question categories and distributed index cards to his family the night before, which he mentioned during the pre-game introduction as evidence of his preparation. He was not wrong that this constituted real preparation. He had done the work. What he had not done was understand the room he was walking into. Miguel Torres had driven from Laredo to Atlanta in his 2007 Ford F-150 because he could not afford 5 plane tickets for a family of 5. The drive from Laredo to Atlanta is 1,050 miles. It takes 14 hours. Miguel had driven it in 2 legs, stopping for 3 hours at a rest area in Mississippi to sleep in the cab of the truck. His wife Carmen had packed a large cooler with food so they would not need to stop at restaurants, which would have added $75 to $100 to a trip they were already stretching to manage. His son Roberto, 26, sat in the back seat with his sisters Marisol, 22, and Elena, 18, and their cousin Freddie, 23. They had listened to the radio and talked, and watched Texas become Louisiana, become Mississippi, become Alabama, become Georgia through the truck windows over the course of a day and a half. When the Atlanta skyline appeared on the morning of the second day, Roberto Torres looked out the window at it and said, quietly and without making it a moment, "We made it." The Torres family had applied to Family Feud because Alina, the youngest, had been accepted to the nursing program at the University of Texas at Austin, and the tuition for her first semester was $9,400. Miguel had $3,200 in a savings account he had been building for 4 years, adding to it when he could from 2 jobs, a day shift at a manufacturing facility and a weekend shift at a home improvement store. He was $6,200 short. He had approached his employer about an advance on wages. His employer had given him $500 and apologized that it couldn't be more. He had called the nursing program's financial aid office to ask about a payment deferral plan. The plan required 50% of the semester cost paid up front. He was still short. He had submitted the Family Feud application the same week Alana's acceptance letter arrived. He told Carmen, "We're going to go win the money on the show." Carmen said, "You don't know that you will win." Miguel said, "No. But I know we're going to try." The cooler Carmen Torres packed for the trip had been planned the week before. She made it a project, calculating what 5 people needed for a day and a half of driving without stopping at restaurants, buying the groceries on a Tuesday, dividing everything into portions and labeled containers so that nothing was wasted and nothing was missed. Sandwiches with the crusts cut off, because that is what she did. Fruit in sections. Cookies Miguel didn't know she'd made until they appeared from the cooler somewhere in Louisiana. There is a form of love that expresses itself entirely in logistics, in the careful management of a limited budget to produce something that feels like abundance. And the Torres family ate from that cooler across 4 states and did not once feel the absence of a restaurant, because the care that went into the packing made the food taste like something more than food. Roberto Torres sat in the back seat with his window cracked for most of the trip. He had been home for 6 weeks. 6 weeks is not a long time when you have been somewhere that 13 months in a fundamentally different register than civilian life operates in, where the body's threat calibration is set to a completely different baseline and then asked at the end of those 13 months to simply reset. Roberto was in the process of resetting. He ran every morning. He helped his mother in the kitchen when he could. He sat with his father in the evenings, and they talked about things that didn't require words, the way men who have known each other for a long time sometimes do. The trip to Atlanta was the farthest he had been from home since he got back. He watched Texas become Louisiana through the window. He did not say much. He did not need to. Nobody in the studio that Tuesday knew any of this yet. The 2 families took their positions. The Caldwells on the right, the Torres family on the left. Bryce Caldwell worked his way down the handshake line with the ease of someone who shakes hands professionally. When he reached Miguel, he shook his hand warmly and looked at him with a specific kind of smile, the smile of a man who considers himself generous and has not yet been given reason to examine that assessment. Then, as the families settled into position and Steve was still making his way across the stage, Bryce leaned toward the podium and said what he said. Miguel Torres put his hands in his pockets and looked straight ahead. Steve Harvey stopped walking. 4 seconds of stillness in a room of 300 people who are holding very still themselves. Then Steve walked 12 deliberate steps to the center podium and stood there. He did not pick up his cards. He did not look at Bryce Caldwell with anger or theatrics or the performance of a confrontation. He looked at him with the particular, focused attention of a man who has been exactly where Miguel Torres is standing, and who therefore has something very specific to say about what Bryce Caldwell just said, and what it reveals about the distance between his understanding of this room and the room's actual reality. He said, "Let me tell you something about what winning looks like." He paused. He let the room wait for it. This man drove 14 hours in a pickup truck to stand here today. And you are the one who needs luck. The audience erupted. Not politely. The way people erupt when someone has said something that is not simply a response, but a full illumination of something they have all been thinking, and no one has said. Bryce Caldwell's face moved through surprise into defensiveness, and then into something more complex. The beginning of a reckoning that was going to take longer than one afternoon, but had just been given a starting point. Steve held up one hand. The audience quieted immediately. "I'm not done," Steve said. He turned to Miguel Torres. "Sir, what's your name?" Miguel said, "Miguel." Steve said, "Miguel." I need you to know something before the first question is asked in this game." He looked down the family row to Roberto Torres, who was standing very still at the far end. The kind of still that is not the absence of something, but the presence of a very particular something. The stillness of a person who has been in places where things were not a game and has not yet fully finished leaving. Steve said, "Your son. How long was he over there?" Miguel said, 13 months. Steve closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. He opened them. He looked at Roberto. He said, "Thank you." He said it simply, without ceremony, the way you say something you mean. Roberto nodded once. Steve turned back to both families. "Here is what I know about competing," he said. "Preparation you can put on index cards is real. I respect preparation. I believe in it. But there is a kind of ready that no index card can give you. It is the kind of ready that comes from going through things that would have stopped most people, and getting up anyway. And that family," he gestured to the Torres side, "has been through some of those things. All of them. Together." He let what he had just said stand in the room for a moment, without adding to it. There are things that are reduced by the addition of more things, and what Steve had said was one of them. The room held it. 300 people held it. Roberto Torres, at the end of the family row, was looking at the floor with his arms folded and his jaw working the way a man's jaw works when he is controlling what his face does very carefully. Miguel put one hand briefly on Roberto's shoulder, just the weight of it, for 3 seconds, and then took the hand away, and Roberto looked up, and the moment was over, in the way that the most important moments are often over, without ceremony, without announcement, replaced by what comes next. The game began. The Caldwells were, as Bryce had correctly assessed, very prepared. Their answers were fast and coordinated, and their communication across the podium was strong. They scored well. But the Torres family moved differently, not slower, with weight. A different texture. Miguel Torres answered questions the way someone answers who has been making real decisions under real conditions for 20 years, and game show questions, however high the personal stakes, did not access the same fear response in him that they accessed in someone who had not lived with financial uncertainty as a daily companion. Roberto answered 2 questions and got both on the first buzz. When Alina scored on a question in the final round and jumped with her hands over her mouth, Miguel put his hand on her shoulder and smiled with every part of his face. The smile of a man watching something he has been waiting to see for a very long time and has earned the right to watch. The Torres family won. Elena's answer in the final round put them over by 43 points. The fast money prize was $20,000. Elena's semester tuition was $9,400. The prize was the margin between possible and impossible. Steve held up one hand before the closing. "Before we end this," he said. He turned to Elena. "How old are you?" She said 18. "What are you studying?" "Nursing." Steve looked at her for a long moment. "Why nursing?" She looked at Roberto at the end of the row. She said, "Because my brother came home. And I want to know how to take care of people who've been through things." The studio fell completely silent. Steve pressed his handkerchief to his face. He turned away for a moment. Then he turned back. He pulled his phone from his jacket, something hosts never do during tapings. He called the director of a university partnership he maintained for scholarship support. On speaker, he said, "Elena Torres, accepted to nursing at UT Austin. I want to cover 4 full years of tuition from my foundation. Name it after her father. Miguel Torres Scholarship for first-generation nursing students. Get it started." The line confirmed. He put the phone away. He looked at Bryce Caldwell. Bryce Caldwell had been standing very quietly for the last several minutes on the other side of the stage. He had the look of someone who has arrived silently and without announcement at an understanding he did not have when the day began. He raised his hand. Steve looked at him. "Mr. Harvey," Bryce said. "Can I say something?" Steve said. "Go ahead." Bryce turned to Miguel Torres. He said, "Sir, I apologize for what I said before the game. That was wrong. I'm sorry." Miguel Torres looked at him for a moment, the calm, unhurried look of a man with nothing to prove. "Thank you, son," Miguel said. "Take care of yourself." The audience applauded, quietly, the way people applaud when they are witnessing a genuine moment that doesn't require their volume. Steve Harvey looked at Bryce Caldwell. "You are young," he said, "and you learned something today. That is worth more than any prize. Use it." When the episode aired 7 weeks later, Steve's 15-word sentence became the most shared clip of his entire career. It was viewed 250 million times across platforms. Philosophers, educators, and labor advocates quoted it in opinion pieces. The hashtag "He drove 14 hours" was used 8 million times. A sociology professor at a major university built a week-long curriculum unit around the episode, specifically exploring the difference between preparation as practiced skill and preparation as accumulated experience under pressure, and whether privilege distorts a person's ability to recognize the second kind. 3 months after the taping, Alina Torres began her first semester of nursing on a full 4-year scholarship. She shared a 45-second video on her first clinical day, in scrubs, outside the hospital entrance. "I want to thank my dad," she said, "who drove 14 hours. I want to thank my brother, who came home. And I want to thank Mr. Harvey, who reminded the whole country that showing up, just showing up, is the first form of winning." The video was viewed 12 million times. A year after the episode, Roberto Torres enrolled in a veterans counseling program. He said in an interview that he was learning what coming home meant, that it was its own process, separate from the deployment, that it took as long as it took, and that he was beginning to understand that was okay. He had started running again, which he had done before deployment. 3 miles every morning before 6 a.m. He said it helped. He said he was sleeping better. Bryce Caldwell has been seen in photographs at a veterans service organization in Phoenix, Arizona. He has not publicly connected the visits to the Family Feud episode. He has not needed to. The Miguel Torres Scholarship for first-generation nursing students dispersed its first awards the following academic year. Alena's scholarship covered 4 years of tuition, room, and board. The endowment Steve established was structured to fund additional recipients each year, with preference given to students who were the first in their family to pursue a healthcare profession. The application required 1 short essay. Describe someone in your family who gave you something they couldn't afford to lose. The scholarship committee read every submission. Alina sat on the committee during her 2nd year of nursing school. She said it was the hardest and most important thing she had ever done, reading 62 essays about sacrifice, each one from a person who had arrived at the edge of something difficult and decided to go through it anyway. Today, Miguel Torres is still working 2 jobs. He said in a recent interview that he will keep working until Alina finishes school and until Roberto is fully settled. He said he is not tired. He said the 14-hour drive was easy. He said easy was not exactly the right word, but it was the truest one. Because when you are doing something for someone you would do anything for, the distance stops measuring itself as a sacrifice and starts measuring itself as a direction. And a direction, Miguel Torres said, is not a burden. It is just the way you know which way to go. If Steve Harvey's 15 words and Miguel Torres's 14-hour drive move something in you today, subscribe to this channel and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the most powerful person in any room is always the one who showed up the hardest to be there. Have you ever watched someone mistake the appearance of preparation for actual character, and then watched character win? Tell us in the comments. And ring that notification bell, because more stories about the people who drive 14 hours and why it matters are coming every week. Do not miss a single one.